Greetings, people of the internet. This is Scott with Serkworks Art Labs. Welcome once again to the underground laboratory where together we're going to create some awesome comics. I am in the command center of the underground lair, which means I've got my Cintiq and all my computer equipment and everything. So I'm going to do this digitally. I like to kind of go back and forth, traditional, digital, just so no matter what medium you use, there at least be some content for you. But really, it doesn't matter whether you work traditionally or digitally. All this stuff really is going to apply no matter what. So what we're talking about today, the topic this week is penciling. We're on our second issue of penciling. Released the main episode where I talked a little bit about the fundamentals. One of those fundamentals, one of the things that's very important is proportion. So we're going to talk a little bit about proportion. Now, when you're drawing comics, you have to learn how to pretty much draw everything, but we're going to focus on the proportion of the human figure, and obviously we're going to have to draw other things as well. The good thing is, when you're thinking about proportion, everything is in relation to something else. So we're going to talk about how the human figure is so many heads tall, so we're measuring the whole figure by one part of the figure, the head, and that goes the same for anything else we're drawing, because in our world, anything that's constructed by humans or is for our use, whether there are houses or cars, anything out there, tools that we use, it is all based on our own proportions. So if we know the proportions of the human body, we're going to know how big to make a doorway. I mean, obviously, and where to put the door handle. I mean, we're not going to have no one's going to design a door handle that's out of reach of a human person, and likewise, no one's going to build like a countertop that is at somebody's knees. So everything that's designed for us is designed for our use or the average person's use. So that's going. Once we know the proportions of the human figure, we'll know kind of how big everything else is in comparison, or small. So that's all we're going to focus on today, is because we could, again, I always kind of preface this, but we could go on and do a whole channel just on proportions, because there's so much, and that's kind of stuff that you're going to have to dive into later, but I want to get the basics out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the tools that are in both the Comic Maker Starter Kit and the Toolkit, and I'll let you know which is which. The Starter Kit is free to download at Serkworks.com. You can just go to my website, and there'll be a link to learn how to make comics, all that kind of stuff, and that'll give you access to the Starter Kit files. This, what you're looking at right now, this male character turnaround, that is in the Starter Kit, as well as this one here, the female figure as well. Both of those are in the Starter Kit. Now the tool, what we're going to use is only in the toolkit. I'm trying to use mostly stuff that is in the starter kit, so because the Comic Maker Toolkit actually is a premium product, and it does cost a little bit of money. That is also available at Serkworks.com in the downloads section of the store. But you could use this as well, these free files too. But just what I'm going to focus on right now is this skeletal diagram, and this is only in the Comic Maker Toolkit. But like I said, the proportions are all the same. So, I mean, this will give you a little bit of a leg up if you go to like the male and the female. We're going to go back and forth a little bit. But anyway, so these lines here that you see moving across, those are all the same, as you can see. If I flip this on here, the lines run through. So you can use this also, and it's basically your proportions are there. But for this purpose, we're going to start with this skeleton. And like I said, in dealing with proportions of the body, we tend to, or one way to do it is to measure everything by the head. Now, some people prefer to, break things down into the different areas of the body, whether it's the head, the torso, the legs, whatever works for you. But by and large, most people use sort of that head comparison, but I'll show you another way as well. So let's see. So right here, you can see in our, we're drawing like superhero comics. Now, the average person, they say it's about 7.5 heads tall. You can see this one here is 8 heads tall. Now, I think 7 heads is probably about more realistic, but we're drawing comics and stuff, so we're exaggerating a little. So we're going to go with the 8 heads tall here, as you can see. Another thing you can do, another option, is not just to measure the head, but just the cranium. And you can see in this diagram here. So this right here would be the cranium, and it's pretty much a perfect circle. So that's what we've done. That's what I've done with this. And it because it's a little bit smaller, it breaks down a little bit easier. So you can see from the head to the shoulders, it's about 2 craniums tall. The torso is about 4, or 2 tall, 4 altogether as far as height and width. The arms, the upper arms and the lower arms, and again, I'm not going to go with the actual anatomical names and things like that. There's, I'm just going to say forearm. So anyway, those are each about 2 craniums. The torso, I start at 1 tall, and then underneath that, you can see where the leg. Oh, you can't see that. Okay. You can see right here where the legs attach to the torso. Above that is like 1. Now, the torso obviously does come down a little bit, but where the legs attach, you've got 3. The upper part of the leg, is at the femur, I think. And then the lower part from pretty much from knee to the bottom of the foot are both 3. So because of that might be a little bit easier to follow. So just something to keep in mind, but whatever works for you. But the main thing is once we get a system down where we can recognize that what we're drawing is in proportion, because I see so many people struggle with this, and partially because they're not thinking of breaking things down. A lot of people want to just get into the drawing. They want to skip the gestures. They want to skip all the constructive lines and all that stuff and just go right into drawing. And that's where, if you're not, if you don't pay attention to this stuff, your characters are just the proportions aren't gonna look right. But once you learn it, you can, no matter what, like you could twist, like I could move this arm out here, down here. I could put the arm up here because I know about how big the arm is. You can move things around, and then obviously also we can move things in once we also understand 3D space, and we'll get more into that probably on the next bonus issue, because there's more foreshortening involved. Once we start breaking things up like that. So just knowing how to break the figure down, that's going to be super helpful, because once you understand this, you'll be able to correct yourself when something just doesn't look quite right. So whether you use the full head method or this sort of cranium method, whatever way you're comparing it, but just make sure that you keep that in mind, and that should help you as far as your different proportions. All right, so what I've done here is I'm going to get rid of this back view of this character here, and you can see where the lines sort of go across here. So we're going to use those as a guide, and you can also, like I said, you can also use the male turnaround or the female turnaround. And so let's start right now. We're gonna sort of using these as a guide. All right, so we talked about the cranium, so I'm going to draw the cranium in here, and then from there I'm going to draw like a little box down below. That's going to be basically our head shape. And what I always do is I usually put a line down the middle and a line here, so I know where to set my eyes and all my facial features, which we'll get into. I'll talk about that as well in this video. And then right here, I'm just going to go, that's going to be the neck. And we can kind of see where our shoulders are here. And I like to just kind of do a shape like this. Now right now, this is basically, we're just kind of dealing with more or less like stick figures, all right? And then I like to just indicate where the ball, of the shoulders are. Go down here, same thing here. And I'm just going to draw some construction lines so I know. right here, and then he probably should. And this is going to be a male figure here, so we can sort of figure out where the hips are here and angle them out. And you know, I typically do kind of a shape like this, almost like an underwear shape. Again, we can put sort of the balls of the joints here. And then from there we can kind of flesh it out. And we'll, like I said, next issue we'll get a little more into the more construction lines and things like that. The hands. Oh, another thing, in talking about comparing things, and I did mention this on the other episode, but so just to know, just to get an idea, so say our hands and our head are in proportions, we can kind of draw our hand, and I mentioned this, that our hand is relatively the size of our face. Not our whole head, but if you were just to cover from the palm of your hand, if you rested on your chin, it should come right up to about your forehead. So that'll, you know, that'll kind of show the make sure that those proportions are right. So when we're drawing our hands in here, we're not going to get too much into hands. Those are pretty difficult to draw, but you know, it's just a matter of looking at your hands. I mean, you realize that your middle finger is the longest, and then it kind of goes at an arch like this. So that's something I usually do, just to make sure my fingers aren't like, so I don't got like one long finger here, one short one like that. We don't want any of that. So I usually just do draw a little arch here. Now, of course, there are differences between male and female. With the male, the shoulders here, let me move this up. All right, the shoulders here are going to be, that's the broadest area, and it kind of tapers down. A male's waist is not quite, it's not as broad as the shoulders, whereas on a female, all right, so let me delete that. You see on the female, the shoulders are going to line up with the hips. So if you just draw a line here, you can see how the shoulders line up with the hips. That's not exactly the same as the male. Obviously, women have breasts, but right now we're just kind of figuring out like the basics here. So if we were to use these tools in the Comic Maker starter kits, if you're not purchasing the toolkit with the skeleton diagram, you can kind of do the same thing here. I'm just gonna kind of slope down here. We're gonna go at an angle, and right here, here's where the hips kind of pop out in the women. Just remember shoulder length, and then we can kind of do the same thing here. But you'll notice that the upper arm and the lower arm are about the same length, and see where they rest here. Your arms, when they're at your side, they're going to rest. They're not going to go down to your knees, and they're going to go below your hips. So just about this point, about a little less than probably halfway from up from your knees to where your hips, your legs connect to your hips. That's about where your hands are going to are gonna lie when they're down like that. So again, when I draw hands, I usually draw sort of a box like this, and just remember that little arch here for the fingers, and then you can go in and do all this. So yeah. Okay, so pay attention to the proportions of the body. You can use this as a guide. Now we're gonna look at the human head. All right, so this is another diagram. This actually isn't in either of those. This I took from my book series. It's Make Your Own Comics. Those are available on Amazon, and it's just a bunch of templates. But in the beginning, there's some tools and some guides and things. But that's not super important because I'll kind of show you what you need to know without actually having to refer to that. All right, so kind couple things, like I said, usually when I'm drawing the human head, well, we've got our cranium, then we've got sort of this box right here, and then I always put a line right here so I know where to lay my eyes, and then I'll just draw my eyes in here. Let me up the opacity here so maybe we can see a little better here. There we go. All right, so you can kind of see where the ears come just a little bit above the eyes, almost where maybe the eyebrows kind of pop up. You can kind of see that lines up. That's not the case in everything, but we're just sort of dealing with some basics. Also, know that there's an eye space in between the eyes. That's where a lot of people go wrong. Sometimes people set the eyes too close or too far apart. Now, if you're dealing with more of a cartoony character, like with little beady eyes, like a Charlie Brown or something, that's a whole different scenario. But if you're drawing more human, more realistic, then you probably want to have the space between the eyes at about an eye space. And then likewise on the ends here, from ear to ear, from where the eye is to the end of the ear should be another eye space and another eye space here. So just remember that stuff. That's going to help you out a lot if you just remember, because some people just don't, they get so caught up in everything else and they're not paying attention. We've got these lines coming down. Everything else is going to be pretty symmetrical. We've got let me switch over to black. We've got our nose here. Lines up, of course, in between the eyes. Mouth will line up. And then, we can put, cheekbones and all that other stuff in here as well. And then, like I said, our ears kind of line up at the top, sort of the top of our brow down to where pretty much the bottom of the nose. You can see some of these lines here. Not always, but since what we're doing is sort of stylized, so we can use that as a general rule. And if you want to exaggerate or do anything, you can, but the idea is just to know the basics so that you can exaggerate. So we're not always going to be drawing our character straight on, so let's take more of a little bit of an angled view here. We're going to draw sort of our cranium in here. And that's a good thing, just so you know, when you try to think of everything in 3D space. We'll get a little more into this on the next episode. But see how I'm curving? Since it's not a straight on view, those lines are actually, I'm curving these lines. Same thing with the eye line. See how it kind of curves, knowing that this is a 3D space. That way I know where to put my facial features, so I can draw my eye in here. Now, the other thing you have to consider is, because the head is turned, this eye is going to get distorted a little bit. So, and a good way to just practice this and get more of a familiarity with it is get a balloon and a Sharpie and just draw 2 circles or eye shapes, with the eyes sort of closed on the balloon, and then just rotate it, and you can kind of see how it'll distort a little bit. And this is something I used to be guilty of. Let's see. I would, and even if you look at some of my older comics, you'll notice this. But I would draw the eyes like this, and then I would draw the next eye pretty much the same. But that's not the case, because it's moving around in the 3D space of the head, so it's gonna be distorted a little bit as it curves around in the contour of the head. And then of course we can go in and we can draw the rest of our facial features, but we know where to line everything up, because we've got these lines here. So always pay attention to that. And then you can go in, your hairline, all that kind of stuff. And then also the brow will kind of pop out here a little bit, the cheekbones, depending on your angle, But anyway, so just remember this stuff. Remember the space between the eyes. Remember how the ears line up with how the nose lines up. Everything's fairly symmetrical. And remember your proportions. Remember the 8 heads tall in the case of comics. We can also do the cranium and how that stuff breaks down. But if you pay attention to all this stuff, you're going to recognize if something just isn't right. And it took me a little while to do that. I mean, I was like, my arms were like super long, and they just like nothing. It wasn't right until I started like measuring things, and you're going to get to the point where it comes as second nature. You're going to, just by looking at something, you're going to know if it's out of proportion. But in the beginning, use some of these tools. Use either the head tool or the crane, or the head measurement or the cranium measurement. And when you're drawing, it's all about comparison, and that's going to help you with your proportions. So I know I kind of brushed through some of this stuff, and it's a lot to take in. I understand, but you just go back, use this tool or use this video tutorial. You look at other tutorials out there. There's tons on proportions, there's tons on figure drawing, but you're really gonna you just have to dive in and everything. And again, remember, the key thing again to proportion is everything is relation to something else. Also, you're gonna have, when we get more into perspective, you're going to know that things, obviously we're going to learn that things up closer are going to appear larger than if they're further away, so that's something to consider. But for right now, as far as the figure and things in close proximity to our characters, whether it's something they're holding, a gun or a hammer or whatever, by just comparing one thing to the next, whether it's the head, whether it's comparing our figure to the objects around us, it's all about comparison. So pay attention to that, and hopefully that will kind of get you started and get you able to just notice when things aren't quite lining up right. If there's something I skipped over that's like, wait, that doesn't make sense to me, just let me know in the comments section. Or if you have maybe you don't use either of these techniques, maybe you've got your own techniques that work for you, let me know in the comment section. And then because what works for somebody may not work for somebody else. But I'm just going to kind of present the way I do it, and then hopefully that will help you out, and you can kind of find your own way, whatever works for you. But the important thing is learn the foundations, learn the basics, do your gestures, which we'll get into, learn your proportions, learn how to compare everything. And I think that's going to help you out. So that's going to do it for today. I will see you guys later this week when we dive deeper into gestures and construction lines and breaking things down into shapes and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's all I got to say about human proportions, and I will see you guys next week. Or no, I will see you guys later this week, and that is all.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw and you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. Also, you can follow me at Serkworks on social media, and now you can support the work that I do on Patreon. Do you like making comics? Then go to Serkworks.com and pick up the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It's packed full of fonts, brushes, templates, and more. And best of all, it's totally free.